Alicia Griffith. I'm the new Main Street Director, and part of the initiatives that we're doing is trying to, as I'm sure that you've heard, revitalize downtown. So I know everybody received the public notice. How many people are so excited about it? No one. So it really does have some really great benefits. Part of the revitalization is to try to draw businesses in and to help the community and to help the business owners, building owners, community members, homeowners, help them revitalize the exterior of their building. And part of that is there's a program called the Bailey's Build Program. Is anybody familiar with that? So what that does is it was brought into legislation in 1992. Other municipalities have already adopted it as far back as Columbia in 2007, Fort Mill in 2011, Beaufort in 2014. And basically what it is it's a tax abatement. So it freezes your taxes. So if you buy a property or a house or a commercial building and you spend $200,000 and you put in $500,000 and now the value of it is $1.2 million. Your taxes are frozen to pay property taxes on the $200,000, what you bought, what you purchased it for, or what your current building is worth. And council has already adopted 20 years. So that's for 20 years that it's frozen at that $200,000 mark. So what does that mean? It means that there is going to be an extra layer of paperwork that you're going to have to fill out an application. It does mean that in order to establish that we have to create the HPOD, which is the Historic Preservation Overlay District, which I'm sure all of you have properties that are in it. Is that correct? So it affects you in some capacity. It is a good thing because it does help, like I said, for tax credit purposes and alleviates some tax burden on you. So that's the good news. The criteria is that in order to be able to be eligible for the Bailey's bill is that you have to be located in the district, and this is just a draft form. This has been approved by the Economic Development Board. It has been approved by the Main Street Steering Committee. It has been approved by the Architectural Review Board, which is part of the board that you have to have in order to have the historic overlay and the Bailey's bill. Does everybody follow me so far? So
the Planning Commission.
And the Planning Commission. So, and then the next step is it'll go to Town Council for ultimate approval. So this is just a draft. This is just what we said. Let's start with a small area first. Let's see what kind of benefits can be drawn from this from these particular members or business owners, building owners, homeowners. There's going to be a public hearing and a first reading, as you read in the public notice, which will be August 14th, and then it'll go for the second reading in front of council on the 11th to be approved. So in saying that, you're going to have to apply if you want to do some renovations. There is an architectural review board that will review that, and then it's a pretty streamlined process. And it's in order to help preserve the historic look of downtown and Main Street in particular. So we don't have I used this example a few minutes ago, we don't have a Miami Vice vibe or a South Beach vibe house that pops up because somebody wants to renovate and do something different. And so it just keeps with the look that we already have. Anything that you want to add so far? Any questions so far?
Is there a fee to put in for the Architectural Review Board?
So there will be a application fee that you'll have to pay, and I believe
it's $35 for buildings that are under 5,000 square feet and $100 for buildings that are greater than 5,000 square feet. And of course, that would have to be approved by town council as well.
Which is consistent with any other application fees. It's actually on the low, we selected the lower end.
So is it mandated that we participate in this, whether we want to or not? Because you just said that it's to basically prevent people from buying a property and doing what they want to it. So is it forced participation if the historical district?
So if you are within the historical district, then you are part of the historic preservation overlay district. So if you wanted to do renovations to the exterior of your building, then you would be included in this.
So the
And
grandfather,
the benefits that you would reap would be to be able to have the tax credit.
so the grandfathered in does not apply anymore. So any cars backing out onto 321 or signs, they would all have to come down?
No. What it means is that if you do any work on the exterior of your building, to include new signage, new landscaping, any of that, you just have to apply to the ARB and meet their standards before you can pull a zoning or building permit.
Okay, so those that are already in the condition that they're in,
No effect until new work is proposed.
but on here where it said the threat to public safety, I've seen a lot of those. So what control do you guys have over the threat to public safety?
That is an exemption from having to go before the Architectural Review Board to get a certificate of appropriateness. Because again, it will add a longer lead time in order to get work done to the exterior. The exception is threat to public safety. If a property is burned,
Or a tree falls on your house.
or there is a major roof leak we talked about in another group that is causing more damage to the property than the time and waiting for that time to go before the ARB would only prove more dangerous to the property itself or to the people who are occupying the property.
So
That's
the
what
mill
that means.
would not be considered part of that.
The what?
The mill, the little mill down here.
A mill is by itself is not dangerous.
Okay,
And
that's
this
what I want to know.
well, I mean it is, but just because you are zoned into the historic preservation overlay district, that doesn't mean that we come in and say you have to do this and you have to come into compliance and you have to do more and you have to come into compliance with the new regulations. It is only triggered when you as the owners start to do the improvements.
Give me an example of the signs. Say, hypothetically speaking, I don't have to build another ramp, and it's changed, signage has to change.
Sure. If your signage is, for example, is flashing neon purple and hot pink, which I don't think any sign on Main Street is, then if you were going to change that sign, somebody else bought the business and they wanted to put a new sign, you would have to come before as being in this overlay district, apply for a certificate of appropriateness, bring a sample of what the sign is going to look like, and I would think
you have a sample of the signs that y'all want. Y'all have an idea of what you want.
That's a very good question. I think that the idea of what we want is very similar to what we already have on Main Street, right? Are all of those design ideas in a book yet? Absolutely not. This is brand new program, brand new process, and there's still a lot to be fleshed out. The ordinance provides too that we can create we're calling it a palette. That may not be the correct word, but that we can create, when I say we, I mean the Architectural Review Board can create a palette whereby you have all of the signs that would automatically meet the regulations, and then you don't have to go before the Architectural Review Board. It can be approved by staff. But we don't have that in place yet.
Will you have this in place when and if it is all final?
No, sir, we will
So
not.
we're gonna be guessing what you're gonna come up with.
You
right?
will, it will not be a guess because it will be signs that are similar to the historic signs that are already in this area. The guidelines in the actual ordinance state that the work or the exterior improvements that are being proposed, one of the first criteria is that it doesn't adversely impact the character and the harmony of the historic district.
Basically, when I read that, you may have to help me.
And I'm sorry, what's your name?
My name's David.
Hey, David.
Right. I basically can't change. I can't basically do anything but wash my windows on my building without permission. You know.
Once this goes into effect, you can do routine maintenance on the building. You
But
cannot
I can't change
change.
color. I can't change design.
That's
I can't
exactly
change,
right.
I can wash my windows. I basically can't change my door.
That's to the exterior. You're exactly right. Anything on the interior of your building is between you and the building code.
So I have to come up here and get permission, get a permit to do anything.
On the exterior of your building, signs, exterior paint colors, landscaping, change of signs, change out of windows.
How about enlarging or building another building?
It's good to see you. Enlarging, adding onto an existing building would also have to come before the Architectural Review Board. Demolition of any existing building the day that this overlay goes into effect, which is could be September. If council needs more time, they can delay it and have final approval when they see fit. Right now, again, as she mentioned before, first reading and the public hearing are coming up on October the 14th. But so this would cover then any demolition of any existing building, any addition to an existing building, any new construction on a lot that has been undeveloped, and any exterior change would have to come before the ARB. And even though we don't have like that palette set in place, again, as long as I would think, and it would be staff recommendation to review all of these applications and all of that, I wouldn't think that we're going to be adverse to, again, signs so long as they go within to the flow of what is existing. And you still have to meet the underlying zoning code for the district.
Do you honestly think this is going to draw and attract people to come in and build and renovate buildings? Is anybody on this committee, do they anybody have?
We do honestly think that will happen. We do honestly think by establishing a historic preservation overlay, whereby your neighbor knows that you're not going to paint your building hot pink. Your neighbor knows. I'm sorry. Your neighbor knows that. There will be some comfort in that on the real estate end, right? I mean, that is what people want some comfort in, especially if you're in a historic district. The other benefit, as she described, would be the benefit of the Bailey bill tax assessment. So that when you do go into your building and you are investing in your building, then there is a very, very real tax savings to you on that investment.
And I'm going to say, as someone that just sold their house, this is one of the reasons I did. So I disagree with you completely. I want it out as soon as possible. So, I mean, I just need the yin and the yang there. Not everyone thinks this is going to be beneficial to have more control over the downtown district and those that are in it.
I appreciate your opinion. Again, pretty much, I think all of the other municipalities in York County have some level of a historic district with additional regulations. We are the last.
Is this a done deal?
No, sir. It's not a done deal.
We're talking about it like, well, on the 11th, this is going to come in, and after that,
This is
they
just
can vote down.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That is one. This is public information session. Public hearing is August the 14th, and then council will have first reading, or they can say, no, we don't approve at all, or they can say, we approve with conditions, or they can say, approve, and, say, no, we don't want, X, Y, and Z properties, or they can say, yes, we approve it, and then it goes into a second reading. There must be 2 separate readings at public meetings, which are open to the public. Yes, sir.
I'm one of the owners of Progressive Plastics.
Yes.
Old brick,
Yep.
old cotton warehouse. We're in the process of planning to add on to our business.
Okay.
I need to know that I can build a metal building off of mine in my parking lot.
And see, right now, there are already regulations on your property because you are in the corridor overlay district. So there are already regulations about metal buildings and having some mixed materials on buildings that face the front. So I can't say for sure whether your proposal to expand would be approved or not approved. It would really just depend on the plans that are submitted.
When is your earliest this will go into effect?
That would also be up to council. Typically, ordinances go into effect at second reading, but they can set another date. They can set it for the date that second reading is held. They can set it for, let's assume it's September the 11th, which is the proposed date for the second reading. They can say this won't go into effect for 60 more days or 90 more days. They have the option to do that as well.
September 11th,
That's the planned second reading, and that also assumes that first reading is approved. Okay, so these are all just estimated timelines.
what are the consequences of not following the regulations?
Good question.
If someone were to do exterior work without a certificate of appropriateness, then there could be a fine.
There could be.
Just like there is with, any other violation of a code.
And that will be discussed prior to it being voted in. If it is voted in on September 11th, what the fine would be, or
All fines are set by state law.
by state law.
Yes.
But you don't know what that is already.
There are maximums, $500.
Okay.
There will be there's very, very few fines in our municipal code of fines and violations that have a specified amount. So it's the breadth of from $0 to $500.
When will all these details be together?
Which details?
Everything, the board is gonna have some details on how they make a decision on
Right.
a condition or.
Well, those are in place. The only thing that we don't have in place is that palette. These 5 different signs will automatically meet, the ARB standards. These exterior colors will automatically meet. That's the only thing that we don't have in place. Other than that, there are guidelines, not guidelines, there are the requirements of what the ARB will take into account and what they will consider for determining appropriateness. And those include things like a property's use is a new use that requires minimal change, or any kind of use of any property, minimal change to a distinctive material, an exterior feature, exterior spaces, and spatial relationships. The historic character of the property is retained and preserved. The removal, again, of these words, distinctive materials or alteration of features, spaces, and spatial relationships that characterize a property will be avoided. Each property will be recognized as a physical record of its time and place of use. Changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding, some architectural feature from a whole different timeline, would be discouraged and probably not approved. Changes to property that have acquired historic significance in their own right will be retained and preserved. Distinctive materials, features, finishes, and construction techniques or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property will be preserved. And then there are a bunch more on this page. It talks about deteriorated historic features should be repaired rather than replaced. Talks about archaeological resources which should be protected and preserved, if any of those even apply to any of these projects. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction will not destroy historic materials, features, and spatial relationships that characterize the property. Then it talks about all the new additions. Again, just being in harmony. So if you're building a new building, it needs to be in harmony with the historic building that is on the property. Yes, sir.
If the building is currently historically correct, but not usable, and you want to replace the building with something that fits in with the downtown, is that likely to be approved?
That, of course, is again not up to staff. That would be up to the Architectural Review Board. And I think that it would be taken on a case-by-case basis,
You can understand
depending
how-
on the building.
You can understand how it's difficult to go from autonomous to feeling like you're being controlled.
I agree. I mean, I get it. And that is why we are having this public information meeting, so that we can have these kinds of discussions. There is already, though, just remember that there is already a layer of regulation on your properties right now through our zoning ordinance. And for most of you guys, there is an additional layer because you are also located in another overlay district called the Corridor Overlay District. And this, of course, would be another one aimed at, again, preserving the historic integrity, fostering, what were some of the different words, different things, civic pride, preserving local heritage, and again, preserving architectural features and distinct features that make the buildings, that make when people come into town say, you got such charming buildings on Main Street. That's what we're trying to do. Yes, sir.
I think you can understand why people are skeptical losing their autonomy over their property that they purchased.
But again,
under
that is the
previous-
reason for having these public information sessions.
So
Yes.
if most of us are under the corridor overlay,
Mhm.
I will admit I'm not familiar, but why is that not suitable? What are the limitations of the corridor overlay?
Why is that not
necessitate
enough?
a U overlay?
Right. Why is that not enough? Well, I think that it has been enough over the last few years. The town of Clover has had the option to implement a historic overlay district since the ordinance was approved, I don't know, like mid-2000s, maybe 2005, 6. So we've had the opportunity to say, we're going to apply this. We got to a point where, quite frankly, the benefits of the Bailey Bill and the desire for economic incentives for people who own buildings on Main Street who may not have maintained them, as some of you have maintained your buildings, to give them the opportunity and the tax incentive to improve their buildings. The Bailey Bill requires historic designation, either through an overlay district or in some other way from a historical society, which we do not have in the town.
So the corridor district does not
Does not count for that. That's right. Yes, sir.
What qualifies as historic?
Shockingly, it's anything over 50 years old. Historic. Barely historic, but I am historic. Under the law, it has to be 50 years old.
No historic day.
Just the age. And I think too, Judge, that what would happen is that the ARB, I would think, would take into consideration that there are differences in the buildings in the Historic Preservation Overlay District, right? Some of the buildings that are on South Main that you own are different than, say, for example, the newer home that was built on the corner of Main Street and Oak Street. I mean, that house isn't 50 years old. It's still in the Corridor Overlay District, but it doesn't quite, make that. But again, when we were drawing, but when we were drawing the map, which you all kind of got a copy of in the mail, we were trying to make it as cohesive of an overlay as we could. Easier for us to administer, easier for people to understand, and I would say, 85% of the properties do meet the historic criteria.
And the open land down where the mill was torn down and where the softball park used to be,
Mm-hmm.
if something's built there, it has to
Yes,
fit in with the
it would have to fit in with the historical.
facades of Dolly River.
Yes, sir.
So it has
Yes,
to look
sir.
old.
So that there won't be and I'm not going to I'm not going to bash a business, but I do remember years ago in Lake Wiley on 274, Highway 49, that a title chain store built a building there, and it was
Yellow and green.
it was very, very, very green and very, very yellow, and that's the national chain's colors. That upon implementation of this, that would be preventable. Right now, not preventable.
Well, they didn't change the colors anyway.
They didn't have to because they didn't they have an overlay district to prevent and protect from that. We don't either.
They were pressured to change the code, but they didn't.
And they didn't. And then they built one on 321 North. But that's out of town. But if they wanted to relocate to, say, for example, the American Thread ball field, there's nothing to prevent that from happening. Not one thing. So there's good and bad with this. We understand that.
It's meant to be an incentive and to be a positive thing. I can see where, if you already have been there and you guys aren't planning on revitalizing, how it can be scary. But if you do decide that you want to do some renovations, and then it can freeze whatever value your building is at now, and you can save that for 20 years, it can be a really good benefit for you financially, and then also protects you, like Allison was saying, from your neighbors doing something crazy or having a tidal place come. And it is a way to give an incentive to say, or to give reason for people to come in and buy some of these older buildings that have sat for so long, that need so much work, to then be able to offset that cost with being able to save on property taxes for an extended period of time.
Going back to Mr. Wright's question about the windows,
Mm-hmm.
if you wanted to change just the font on your window, you have to go get approval for that.
A font on your window, like on a window sign.
No, on your glass window, plate glass window.
If I would, you have to go before certificate of appropriateness on any entrance, which would include a window and a door. Does that mean that you can't replace the exact same thing with the exact same thing? Absolutely
No, I
not.
was talking about
You just have to go through the process to do it.
What's the difference between the requirements for facade grant and this historical district? As far as
Facade grant. The facade grant is a grant program that up until this point, and it's still now we call it the Main Street grant. So it's really two different things.
But you have to meet certain requirements to qualify for the facade grant.
On the facade grant, all you have to do is it is a similar process in that you have to submit to a review board to review the work to make sure that the work is being proposed is going to actually improve a building, because the purpose of that facade grant, which again is an economic development incentive, is to know that the public's dollars are being spent in a good way that will promote and help a business and thus help the entire community. So not dissimilar of a process.
What about existing buildings that need, say, repair?
This adoption of this ordinance would not trigger a knock on your door to say you have to come into compliance with the architectural harmony of this district. It's only triggered when there is a change to the exterior.
And I don't know everybody in here, but how many council people are here?
None.
No. Their role in time, I mean, of course they can come to any public meeting, but their role in time, this is for us to give information and to answer questions so that in preparation for the public hearing, which will be on August the 14th, at which time they will be here to hear your comments.
Awesome. Because you don't have a lot worked out as far as the details, everything sounds so subjective. Let me give you a scenario. I'm representing the houses of worship here, right? So let's say the ARP church under Pastor Miller is really doing great, and their growth can be contained in the building they have there. But the architectural committee sees that building as vital for the look of downtown. And they just say, well, no, you can't change that building because we need that look, even though it's not serving the needs of the congregation.
Right.
Does that make sense? So it's
how would the exterior of the building serve the congregation?
Well, because it's contained in, let's say it's 3,000 square feet, it can only fit a certain amount of people.
Right.
They're outgrowing it, they're having 2 or 3 services they've got to build.
Right.
They have limited amount of land, so they've got to raise what they've got in order to build something suitable.
Right.
And they're willing to do it,
Right.
you know, but it's never gonna be the old building.
And you're talking about
I was talking about the ARP church,
yeah, so you're talking about the primary church building or the building behind?
the primary church.
The primary church building. So the only thing that I can say to that is that because they would be in the Historic Preservation Overlay District, demolitions are covered, and the ARB would have to approve a certificate of appropriateness for the demolition. And that 3-person appointed committee would consider each case, each property on its own merit. So I can't answer, oh yeah, if it's, you know,
No, I'm
if
speaking
a
to the subjectiveness of
Right.
where we're going down a road that's very subjective.
right,
3 people now. 3 people are going to decide what's appropriate and what's not.
that is correct. And that is not a different process, again, than many, many, many other communities that have this same exact setup for historic preservation. So this is not unique to us that we're, you know, doing this. Yes.
I think you're being, well, I see it as being subjective, like he says. So what's the posture towards businesses in particular, retail versus industrial in the historic quarter? Like, is there a set posture where we're going to encourage? Is this to encourage retail business in downtown, or is this to encourage?
Industrial, both, because they would both create jobs. So that would be contributing to the economic benefit, I think, of the entire community. But I also think, and this is kind of just my own opinion, but that, I mean, I'm pretty confident in that the people that have been selected to be part of the board have a responsibility to uphold too. And so I don't think it's going to be unrealistic. So if you're wanting to add on to a building and it's with light material and it falls within a historic look, I can't fathom where somebody would say, no, you can't do that. I'm looking at it as an easier process to get, or an easy process to get to where the benefits can be reaped by the community of being able to tap into the state Bailey Bill program.
See, like us, for example, if we have to build on in a way that looks like our current building, that would be forcing us to build a brick expansion, which is prohibitively expensive. Versus, I mean, that would put us at a disadvantage to anyone else in our line, where I'm having to build a pretty brick building because I can't put up a metal building that's cost efficient.
All right, so let's think about that. So you're going to build a building, say for example, they do make you build all brick, okay? They might. And that would cost you $300,000. But your building value and your land value increases by $400,000 because you did that. Through the Bailey Bill, you are not going to pay taxes for 20 years on that extra where your property has improved. And I get that that's a long game of savings, not right out of your pocket.
Yeah.
Right.
It's called a bank loan.
You'll never recoup that money.
And you know, you can build a metal building that has a brick facade.
I was just gonna
What do they just say about that?
but
And I
It's
can
still
read,
massive.
and I would direct you to the announcement for this meeting that was on our website, because it does have this. I keep waving this paper. It does have what is currently in our historic preservation overlay, the guidelines and the requirements, what the ARB can do, what they can't do, the projects that are exempt, the things that are going to be required, and what they're going to be looking for, which is again harmony within the historic preservation district, not punitive, but harmony, because we are trying to achieve a greater good, which independent cases, that may not be to your benefit, but for the greater good, it might be. And that's one of the things that this ordinance is looking at. Does that make it easier for you to swallow? Nope. It went for me either.
You're selling this with tax incentives, and so people outside the historic district, their taxes are gonna go up because the city budget is not gonna change.
I don't know that improving a business would impact anyone outside the district's property taxes.
So-
Local property
So the
tax.
budget is
Yeah.
gonna be
Only
cut.
for town of Clover property
Okay.
taxes, yes.
So the budget is gonna be cut to keep these,
Well, no, sir, there are a million factors in setting a budget. Tax abatement is something that governments have to do. We do it already with industries that expand. I can't say or draw a line to say that that's what made, your property taxes go up last year, because we gave a tax incentive to Munzing International.
what, 20 years of tax incentives
Right,
is a lot of money.
right. If people avail themselves of it, some people may not want to, do the paperwork on this Baileyville part of it.
How many properties are actually in this historical preservation area?
I believe the number is 141.
Okay.
And there's 6 big churches.
All of, let's see, ARP, First Methodist, the Baptist Church, and the
First
Presbyterian Church.
And then,
The Wesleyan
The
Church
Bridge.
is not.
the bridge.
The Bridge, which is in a historic, a really on the historic register.
They're
Historic.
renting that, right?
No, they bought that
Oh,
building.
they bought it, okay.
Who's on the review board?
There are 3 people on the review board: Angela Stokes, Marcy Trippy, and Kip and Lester.
Do they live in the town of Clover?
2 of them, one does, one lives in a donut hole right behind Killian Service Station, and the other lives on Lawrence Road. I want to circle back around to the words subjective guidelines and whatever. I do believe that the guidelines that are here are going to serve us well as we enter into this new process if it is approved, okay? Becoming more restrictive with guidelines, as in you can only do 1 through 10, may prove to not be worthwhile. So my recommendation has been that we work on this palette, what will work, what won't work, what signs might look well, but work on it over time instead of trying to work really fast and overlook something that might be, acceptable in the district. So right now, it is subjective, but almost better to be have a little bit of discretion than to be, this is what it is.
Well, the devil's in the details.
All the time. Again, I believe and am recommending, that we don't get down into those details right now, that we let the ARB look at some cases, fine tune their processes, look at what is going on, look at what new construction might be. Maybe there are some exemptions or exceptions, but right now, let's take everything on a case-by-case basis.
Well, that's scary, because if one of them mentioned if they change the doorknob and they don't submit the architectural paperwork, they could be fined. So you're saying there is no limit. They could be fined up to $500 for changing a doorknob, but I could paint my house purple and be charged no more than $500. That's a case-by-case subjective, is it not?
No, that doesn't, I don't really track what you're saying right there.
It's up to a $500 fine
Right.
if they do not submit. But
Right.
you said that there's no guideline to where if they put a doorknob and don't get it approved,
Right.
that fine could be anything what you decide.
Sure.
Whereas if
But
they paint,
realistically,
I don't
are
know.
we going to do a $500 fine on a doorknob change
I
out?
do not know.
I don't think so. I don't think we would do that at all.
Well,
So if I raise my building, I'll only pay a $500 fine?
If you tore down your existing building without a certificate of appropriateness, without a demolition permit, and without whatever other proper approvals you have, then you could be subject to fines for whatever all of those violations would add up to.
Okay, how about painting it purple, which is not or a bright yellow?
Painting it purple,
is
then
it 500?
It could be a fine, and then every day that it's painted purple. Again, that's not realistic. There are violations out there right now that we're not going out every day and laying the hammer to. So let's be realistic in how we're talking about this before we go on.
But not knowing is not being realistic. You said it was my opinion. It's a fact I moved out of this area because of how I was treated in this area. That's a fact. That's not an opinion. That's a fact.
Okay.
So, but no,
Yes,
no, Allison, that's very rude. I am actually speaking to you.
But you're not
and
asking a
I
question.
am asking you, but so we're only here to ask a question?
Yes.
That's the only reason. So no one can say anything but ask a question.
The public hearing is the point where people can come and talk
Right.
to council about that. This is
Right.
public information for us to have a back and forth, not to get
And
into
no, I'm not
Okay,
getting in an
ask a
argument with you, Allison, at all. But I wanted to be consistent, and I don't like the fact that we're not saying a doorknob would be this would be this. The unknown is not realistic.
Right.
Would you agree with that? The unknown, not knowing. You're asking us to go on something we don't know.
Well, right now, we have an entire, to not get down into the details, but we have an entire nuisance ordinance that, again, allows us to charge $500. Your dog barks, it could be $500. Do we do that? Absolutely not. There are already 100 potential violations and unknowns, as you say, that don't have exact fine violations. So I promise that we will act as we always do, realistically with our fines and with enforcement. If a gentleman wants to change their doorknob, what really are the chances that we'll know that there was a change of a doorknob? Probably none. If you paint your house
Unless
purple,
it's
we will
something
probably
crazy.
know that.
I guess one of the things I wanted to mention now is it would be more prudent for the, what is it, ARB to go and do their study and come up with really a more comprehensive plan before going forward with the change.
Right. Again, this is my answer. The guidelines, as they are in here, are sufficient for them to get started on their work and to go ahead and develop a book of all the doorknobs and all the windows and all the paint and all of that could necessarily make it a more difficult process in the end. So I understand that there is a worst case scenario thought to this. I don't think that that's how it's going to play out. Again, I know that it's trust, and I know that there's uncertainty, but what we're saying is that the benefits to being in here are a lot. You're preserving the historic integrity of your Main Street. You are providing an opportunity to have an economic development program called the Bailey Bill. You are ensuring that your neighbor isn't going to go South Beach architecturally beside you. There is a give and take to this.
Allison,
No doubt.
has the town had an influx of applications to build in this area? I mean, where did this get started? Are we having a problem with people desecrating the historical buildings or building something that's not appropriate now? Here's what troubles me is, you go to Gastonia, North Carolina, you start at Main Street, you go south on 321, all this historical. What happened up there is when they deemed that historical, people couldn't afford to upgrade those houses. And they're vacant, they're run down, and it's turned into an unpleasant neighborhood. Because once you get historical, they have to go by so many rules and regulations and overlay of regulation. You can't afford to put those houses back the way they want in these sort of historical. And they just become abandoned. Properties lose value, people lose money. And I've seen that over and over again in these towns when this thing is not done correctly.
Right. There may be a difference in that. So number one, I've been on 321. I haven't really noticed the degradation of those neighborhoods or those houses right on 321 north or south. But I mean, I'm not. I just haven't seen like the whole neighborhood go to pot. But keep in mind too that what might have happened with those houses is that they were designated to be on the National Register. That is a bunch of regulations. That is not this. Just because these properties will be, in the Historic Preservation Overlay District doesn't mean that you're going to have to meet National Historic Register guidelines. So if any of you watch PBS about how you have to restore, metal and stone and all of that, has to be done delicately by a process so you won't lose your National Historic Registration certification. That is upper level stuff. That is not what we're talking about here.
Let me ask you this question. I'll probably be the least affected anybody. My building is still historical. I haven't changed much. I've upgraded some. Everything basically looks like it is.
What's your building?
The old barber shop.
The old barber shop. Okay, yeah.
I mean, I cleaned it up, painted it, fixed it up. But my door is the original door. If someone knocks my door down, I can't get a double door. Can I put a metal door up?
That would not be up to me.
So maybe.
That would be up to the Architectural Review Board. I can tell you what my recommendation would be to find a door that is similar to the one that you have.
Find a door like that.
Is your door our glass? Is it wood on the bottom and glass on the top?
Glass panes. It's the original door.
I don't know because I have not Googled that, but I would say let's try to find one that is as close to this original door, the core door.
Well, I can tell you because my daughter.
I don't know because I haven't Googled it.
It's $8,000.
Yeah. Very
what?
Expensive.
My daughter just priced one out, a double door, 60-inch opening, which is probably what you have. Glass. It was $8,000.
Mm-hmm.
See, the tax exemption and all is not really paid for all these regulations.
Right. But that's $8,000 with no more requirements. That's just $8,000 for a glass door. Is that what you
To
said?
get that type of door.
And a frame. So this process shouldn't add more to that. I mean, the price of materials is already, what you said. She's going to replace the door. No regulations is
What you say
$8,000.
is you can do a metal door for less.
Yeah.
Or some other kind of
Right.
If I have to go by your regulations, they'll cut that price out just $4,000.
Right. I don't know that. I've not looked that up. But price may be a consideration for the Architectural Review Board, but again, the overall purpose is to preserve that building. And if by preservation of the character of that building, it would be to replace it with a like door.
But all this preservation culture and all this stuff is coming at the owner's expense. It's hard enough to do business in Clover now and keep tenants and stuff. This is going to add cost to our business. That's all it's going to do. We're the ones going to pay for all of this. Let's be honest.
I mean, the cost to buy any kind of a new door is always going to be on an owner. If there's an incremental cost to meet the requirements, then
you're not being
absolutely.
realistic. We're talking about a door that I can go down here to Lowe's and buy in 30 minutes. Versus looking for a door to fit your criteria to keep it under these regulations.
Right. And the counter argument would be the reason for this Historic Preservation Overlay District is so that you don't put a metal door on your historic building because it doesn't fit into the character of the neighborhood and it is detrimental to the look and harmony of that historic neighborhood.
But do you not really think that Clover could have done a much better job in the past helping the businesses, encouraging business instead of when we come to get a permit or whatever? Really, it's hard to get a contractor to come work at the city of Clover now. They'll say, no, I'm not going to Clover. This is a nightmare. I'm not going to work with those folks.
I hear that about other municipalities as well for
We
contractors.
really hear about Clover. I just think y'all a better job. I don't think this is the way to approach to encourage business.
Well, this is one avenue for doing it that could be very significant for a lot of building owners because it opens the door to the Bailey Bill tax.
Have you had building owners say, yes, this is what we want?
We have had the public during
building owners.
I don't know. There are building owners here. Does anybody see the value of making sure that your neighbor doesn't do anything outrageous with their building and destroy the character of your historic building.
I trust the judgment of the people that buy and spend the money to really treat it and to do what they believe is the best for Clover. I truly believe that.
Each other when we do the town closing.
That's a good point.
I really do.
Is ARB appointed by the town's council?
It is. It
They
is.
serve.
There was an application process. We advertised for people to serve on this board for a number of years before we finally got 3 people all at the same time willing to serve, and they were appointed earlier this year.
And they serve for how long?
A 3-year term, but it's set up to be staggered. So that we'll have, 3 years there. So the first person will roll off in December and then have to be reappointed, or a new person will be appointed to that board. But that is up to town council as well. Any other questions?
I have a question. So we're talking about existing buildings, existing houses. So if it's a current vacant lot, tell me what happens with how the decisions are made, what can be put on that lot.
You would be held to the same standards as an addition or as any kind of an exterior improvement. You would make an application for a certificate of appropriateness, and along with that, you have to supply, here are my materials, here are the colors. It would be a little bit more detailed work up front from your architect or builder to go before the ARB. They will evaluate that based on what is all right beside you. So if I'm not sure where your vacant lot is, so if there are mill homes on either side, then the idea that you would come in with a 4-story modernist building, you're probably going to be denied. If you came in with something that would be harmonious with the neighborhood and with other houses that are all around, then you're likely to be approved. Okay. And I say likely because I'm not going to be a voter.
And I'm not the owner of the vacant lot. I live beside the vacant lot.
Right. Okay. Yes. Then they'll be required to, that's part of what the ARB will do, is take a look at what everything is around and make sure there is harmony.
I have another question. When the Main Street Preservation came and talked to us, and Fred was the big push on the Bailey bill, because nobody even really knew about it in that meeting. We were all kind of like, they talked about how they want a pop-up business kind of parking lot. That was something about the vacant lot down there would be perfect for that. They wouldn't have to conform to it if we did like a open kind of.
If there's a permanent structure, then that structure would have to meet with the historic guidelines. Because they talked. If it's a pop-up temporary event, not so much.
He was talking about making almost like booth areas that would be permanent at that point. If you recall, they would have to.
Design, whether the town is building it or the owner of that property is building it, would come before the ARB and say, "Is this harmonious?" Harmony could mean that it's brick. Harmony could mean that it's wood. Harmony might not mean that it's a stucco Mediterranean style building. That's not in harmony with anything that we have on Main Street. Anything else? Well, thank you guys for coming. Our email addresses and phone numbers are on the website. I think Alicia also has her cards right here. There is a sign-in sheet. You're not required to sign in. The August 14th will be Town Council's public hearing, open to the public, open to your comments. Every person that wants to be at the public hearing and participate and comment there has 3 minutes to do so. That is council's rules. All right. Thank you guys for coming.